A spotlight snaps on. That familiar, whimsical tune plays, and children's laughter fills the room. Pee-wee Herman, our beloved man-child in his signature gray suit and red bow tie, beams a mischievous grin right at us. Then, in a jarring flash, the scene shifts. Police flood a dimly lit adult theater. Cameras flash relentlessly. Arrests are being made. The nation watched in shock. The very face of innocent comedy, Paul Reubens, Pee-wee Herman's creator, is being led away in handcuffs. What happened to Pee-wee? Fans whispered in disbelief. How could our hero fall from grace like this? The cult hero of children's television was suddenly at the center of one of the most bizarre and talked-about scandals of the 1990s. An entertainer's carefully crafted image of innocence was shattered in an instant. But the story behind that arrest goes so much deeper than the headlines. It unmasks a complicated tale of fame, identity, and a nation's shifting cultural boundaries. This is the real story of Pee-wee Herman. Pee-wee Herman wasn't just a character, he was a cultural phenomenon. Created and portrayed by the brilliant Paul Reubens, Pee-wee's Playhouse was a groundbreaking children's show that redefined Saturday mornings. It was a kaleidoscope of surreal humor, quirky puppetry, and a powerful celebration of creativity. For millions of us who grew up in the late 80s and early 90s, the Playhouse was a magical escape, earning critical acclaim and a legion of fervent fans, both young and old. But Pee-wee was so much more than just kids' TV. Reubens himself was a respected comedian and actor, constantly navigating the tricky tightrope between his quirky, world-famous alter ego and his own personal identity. The stakes were enormous. Pee-wee Herman represented innocence, nostalgia, and pure joy to millions. So when the news of Reubens' arrest broke, it wasn't just another celebrity scandal, it was a cultural shockwave. Parents worried about the idols their children looked up to. The entertainment industry, which had crowned Pee-wee as one of its most cherished figures, suddenly had to grapple with a scandal that felt deeply personal to the public. What would happen to Pee-wee Herman, the icon who had captured our imaginations? Could Paul Reubens ever salvage his career and the legacy of his beloved character? Or was this the beginning of a cultural reckoning that would change how we view our heroes forever? This moment mattered, not just for one man or one show, but for an entire nation wrestling with its own shifting values and the often brutal price of fame. To understand the fall, you first have to understand the rise. The birth of Pee-wee Herman began in the 1970s when a young Paul Reubens joined the now legendary improvisational comedy troupe, the Groundlings, in Los Angeles. It was there, during an exercise to create a character who could be funny without telling traditional jokes, that Pee-wee Herman first came to life. He was a quirky, childlike man-child with that signature guttural laugh and unforgettable catchphrases like, "I know you are, but what am I?" Originally, this was a nightclub act, a bit more risque with some adult innuendo. But the character soon evolved into the beloved figure of innocence and whimsical humor we all remember, inspired by the 1950s children's TV hosts Reubens grew up watching and his own boundless imagination. With his too tight gray Glen plaid suit, that little red bow tie, and his distinct high-pitched voice, Pee-wee quickly became a cult figure after Reubens' massively successful stage show in 1981, which was later adapted into a hit HBO special. That special was just the beginning. The 1985 film Pee-wee's Big Adventure, directed by a then unknown Tim Burton, was a surprise blockbuster that catapulted the character into international stardom. It was a perfect storm of weird, wonderful, and utterly unique comedy. Shortly after, Pee-wee's Playhouse landed on CBS Saturday mornings. It was unlike anything else on television, blending surreal storytelling, groundbreaking puppetry, and a kind of irreverent humor that appealed to children and adults at the same time. The show was a sensation, earning several Emmy Awards and cementing Pee-wee as a true cultural icon of the era. Yet behind the childlike innocence and the goofy grin, a complex battle was being waged. Paul Reubens was constantly trying to maintain the balance between himself and his creation, a man oscillating between the pure whimsy of his character and the intense, crushing pressures of global fame. The question always loomed just beneath the surface. What happens when the line between the artist and their alter ego blurs, and the harsh spotlight reveals the cracks in the facade? On the night of July 26, 1991, that facade didn't just crack, it shattered. Paul Reubens, on a break from his grueling work schedule, was arrested in an adult movie theater in Sarasota, Florida, for indecent exposure. The news exploded. Media outlets, which had once celebrated him as a creative genius, now plastered his mugshot across every front page and news broadcast. The irony was brutal. The man who embodied childhood innocence was arrested in the most adult of situations. The public reaction was immediate and polarized. For some, it was a moment of pure shock and disappointment. How could the man who brought them Cowboy Curtis, Miss Yvonne, and the secret word of the day be involved in something so sordid? Conservative groups and parent-teacher associations called for boycotts. CBS immediately dropped reruns of Pee-wee's Playhouse, and Toys R Us pulled all Pee-wee merchandise from its shelves. His career, which had been on a meteoric rise, came to a dead stop overnight. But for many others, the reaction was different. A groundswell of support rose up to defend Reubens. Fellow comedians and celebrities like Bill Maher and Cyndi Lauper publicly stood by him, arguing that his private actions, which harmed no one, had been unfairly sensationalized and blown completely out of proportion. They saw it as a moral panic, a witch hunt, targeting an unconventional artist. The phrase "Free Pee-wee" became a rallying cry. Supporters argued that Reubens was the victim of an overzealous police sting and a media frenzy eager for a scandal. The incident forced a national conversation. Should an artist's personal life dictate the value of their art? And was it fair to hold the real person, Paul Reubens, to the impossible standard of his fictional character, Pee-wee Herman? The scandal wasn't just about one man's mistake. It exposed the deep-seated anxieties America had about fame, privacy, and the messy line between public persona and private life. In the immediate aftermath of the scandal, Paul Reubens disappeared. The whimsical world of the Playhouse was gone, and the man behind it retreated from the public eye, his career in ruins. For years, he was a pop culture punchline, the poster child for a fallen star. Projects were cancelled, opportunities dried up, and it seemed as though Pee-wee Herman might be gone for good. But slowly, quietly, a comeback began to brew. Reubens started taking on small, dramatic roles, proving his versatility as an actor outside of the gray suit. He appeared in films like Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Blow, and had a recurring role on the TV show Murphy Brown, which even earned him an Emmy nomination. These roles were a deliberate choice, showing the world that Paul Reubens was a talented actor, not just a one-trick pony. He was reminding Hollywood and the public of his range and his resilience. Then, something remarkable happened. The kids who grew up watching Pee-wee's Playhouse were now adults, and they hadn't forgotten the joy he brought them. Nostalgia for the 90s began to surge, and with it came a renewed appreciation for Pee-wee's unique brand of genius. The scandal that had once seemed career-ending now looked, in retrospect, like an overblown and unfair ordeal. The public began to see Reubens not as a fallen idol, but as a brilliant artist who had been treated unjustly. In 2010, nearly 2 decades after his career was derailed, Paul Reubens brought the Pee-wee Herman Show back to the stage, first in Los Angeles and then on Broadway. The The shows were a massive success, selling out night after night. It was a triumphant return. The laughter was back, louder than ever, a testament to the enduring love for the character and the man who created him. The final act of Pee-wee's story is one of redemption and legacy. The successful Broadway revival led to a new Pee-wee movie, Pee-wee's Big Holiday, produced by Judd Apatow and released on Netflix in 2016. The film was a critical and popular success, proving that the magic of Pee-wee Herman was timeless. It wasn't just a nostalgia trip. It was a genuinely funny and heartwarming film that introduced a whole new generation to his charm. Paul Reubens had done the impossible. He had resurrected his career and restored the legacy of his most famous creation. The scandal of 1991 was no longer the defining chapter of his story. It was just a footnote. It became a story not of a fall from grace, but of resilience, the power of art to endure, and the public's capacity for forgiveness. When Paul Reubens passed away in 2023, the outpouring of love and grief was immense. Tributes poured in from all corners of the entertainment world and from the millions of fans whose lives he had touched. People weren't remembering the scandal. They were remembering the laughter, the creativity, and the pure, unadulterated joy of Pee-wee's Playhouse. They were remembering a character who taught us to celebrate our quirks, to embrace our inner child, and to find magic in the everyday. The story of Pee-wee Herman is a complex one, full of incredible highs and devastating lows. But ultimately, it's a story about how a unique, visionary artist created a character so full of life and wonder that he became bigger than any scandal. Pee-wee's legacy isn't one of disgrace. It's one of laughter, imagination, and the enduring power of a red bow tie. In July 1991, the innocent, whimsical world of Pee-wee Herman shattered in an instant. In Sarasota, Florida, undercover detectives raided an adult movie theater called the South Trail Cinema. Among the men arrested for indecent exposure was none other than Paul Reubens, the creative genius behind one of the most beloved children's icons of the 80s. The man who taught a generation to laugh at the secret word of the day was now the subject of a very different kind of headline. The news spread like wildfire, igniting a media frenzy. The nation was completely stunned. How could the man who brought such pure, innocent fun into millions of homes be caught in such a scandalous moment? The contrast was jarring, and the public struggled to reconcile the two images. The playful man-child in the grey suit and the real man arrested in a dark theater. In a desperate attempt to control the damage, Reubens reportedly offered to appear in character as Pee-wee at a Children's benefit to make the charges go away. But officials declined. The situation was spiraling out of his control. The fallout was immediate and brutal. CBS, the network that aired his groundbreaking show, swiftly canceled all reruns of Pee-wee's Playhouse. The toys, lunchboxes, and talking dolls that filled store shelves were pulled. Pee-wee Herman merchandise, once a staple of pop culture, vanished overnight. The scandal became a goldmine for late-night comedians. From David Letterman to Johnny Carson, talk show hosts seized the moment, relentlessly ridiculing Pee-wee on national television. The character who once brought joy was now the punchline to a very adult joke. Despite the public uproar and professional ruin, a surprising number of people in the entertainment world stood by Reubens. Friends and colleagues like Cyndi Lauper and Annette Funicello publicly defended him, reminding everyone of the kind and creative person they knew. Reubens eventually pleaded no contest to the charges, which allowed him to avoid a guilty plea while accepting the punishment. He completed his community service and began the long, difficult process of rebuilding his life and career, all while living in the shadow of the scandal. But something had fundamentally changed. The charismatic entertainer was forever altered, and the beloved man-child's innocence seemed lost amidst a storm of public outrage and cultural backlash. What happened next would not only test Reubens' resilience, but also reveal the complex, often painful realities of fame, identity, and public judgment. To understand the depth of this story, we have to look beyond the headlines. Paul Reubens' journey is one of artistic complexity, deep personal struggle, and the inevitable collision between a carefully crafted public persona and a private, hidden reality. He created Pee-wee Herman as an escape, a vessel for whimsy, irreverence, and childlike wonder. Pee-wee was a sanctuary from the pressures and seriousness of adult life, not just for his audience, but for Reubens himself. But behind the too small grey suit and the bright red bow tie was a man navigating his own identity, fighting for his privacy, and grappling with the immense demands of fame in an increasingly unforgiving cultural landscape. His arrest in 1991 didn't happen in a vacuum. It came at a time when society was wrestling with questions of morality, media scrutiny, and the ever-shifting boundaries of personal privacy. The 24-hour news cycle was just beginning to take hold, and celebrities were its primary fuel. Reubens' offer to perform as Pee-wee to "make this go away" speaks volumes. It shows his deep, almost desperate attachment to the character. Pee-wee wasn't just a role, he was armor, a shield, and a direct connection to the fans who adored him. In that moment of crisis, Reubens reached for the only tool he had left. The fierce backlash he faced reflected broader societal tensions of the era. There was a palpable fear of scandal, contaminating the perceived innocence of childhood entertainment. The public's judgment of famous figures became harsher, more absolute. And the story highlighted the fragile, almost impossible balance of maintaining authenticity while living a life under the constant glare of the celebrity spotlight. Ultimately, Reubens' motivation became one of pure survival, both personally and professionally. He was fighting to reclaim his own identity, separate from the character that had defined him and now threatened to destroy him. His story shines a powerful light on the true costs of fame, the incredible power of reinvention, and the ongoing complicated struggle to separate the art from the artist. After the 1991 scandal, Paul Reubens' career seemed destined for ruin. With Pee-wee's Playhouse cancelled and his merchandise gone, the public ridicule and media frenzy left the entertainer in a state of shock and professional exile. It felt like the end of the road. But then, just a few months later, in a moment of incredible bravery, Reubens seized an opportunity that would come to define his resilience and his brilliant wit. The setting was the 1991 MTV Video Music Awards. The industry was buzzing, wondering if he would even show up. When his name was called to present an award, a nervous energy filled the room. He walked onto the stage, not as Paul Reubens, but in full costume as Pee-wee Herman. He stepped up to the microphone, looked out at the silent, expectant crowd, and broke the tension with 5 simple, perfect words. "Heard any good jokes lately?" The entire auditorium erupted. The audience jumped to its feet in a massive, prolonged standing ovation. It was a moment of pure catharsis. That self-deprecating line was instantly praised as a clever, courageous, and perfectly pitched acknowledgement of the scandal. It symbolized Reubens' refusal to hide and his readiness to face the fallout head-on on his own terms. Critics and fans alike hailed the moment as a pivotal comeback and one of the most memorable and human events in the history of the VMAs. It was a masterclass in handling a public relations nightmare. Though CBS never brought back his show, and the controversy continued to shadow his work for years, Reubens quietly began to rebuild. He took on character roles in films like Tim Burton's Batman Returns and the original Buffy the Vampire Slayer movie. He earned a prestigious Emmy nomination for a guest-starring role on the sitcom Murphy Brown. And then, years later, he did the unthinkable. He boldly revived Pee-wee, first on stage in a hit Broadway show, and then on screen for a new generation, culminating in the 2016 Netflix film Pee-wee's Big Holiday. That iconic moment on the VMA stage wasn't just a well-delivered joke. It was a declaration. It was a turning point in a career that had been derailed by scandal, but would ultimately be celebrated for its toughness, its humor, and its profound humanity. It proved that even when your carefully crafted world shatters, you can pick up the pieces and build something new, perhaps something even stronger. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving into the story of a pop culture icon whose world was a whimsical playhouse of talking chairs and secret words, but whose real life was rocked by a scandal that nearly shattered it all. This is the story of Pee-wee Herman and the man behind the bow tie, Paul Reubens. For a generation, Pee-wee Herman was pure, unadulterated joy. Pee-wee's Playhouse wasn't just a kids' show. It was a revolutionary explosion of surreal humor, vibrant colors, and unapologetic weirdness. It taught us to connect the dots, to scream real loud at the secret word, and to embrace the beautifully bizarre. Paul Reubens had created more than a character. He'd built a universe that felt like a secret clubhouse for everyone who ever felt a little different. Pee-wee was a phenomenon, a household name, and the face of a brand that seemed untouchable. But in 1991, the Playhouse doors were slammed shut, and the real world came crashing in. It all happened in an instant. The news broke that Paul Reubens had been arrested for indecent exposure in an adult movie theater in Sarasota, Florida. The media went into a frenzy. The man who played America's favorite man-child was suddenly the punchline of every late-night monologue. The backlash was swift and brutal. CBS immediately pulled all reruns of Pee-wee's Playhouse. Toys featuring his likeness were yanked from store shelves. Even his voice was scrubbed from Disney theme park attractions. It was a public shaming of epic proportions. The character built on innocence was now mired in scandal, and the line between Paul Reubens, the artist, and Pee-wee Herman, the icon, became painfully, publicly blurred. Legally, the consequences were relatively minor. Reubens pleaded no contest to the charge, which allowed him to avoid a formal trial and a criminal record. He was ordered to pay a small fine and complete 75 hours of community service. In a move that felt almost surreal, part of his service involved producing a series of anti-drug public service announcements. He fulfilled his legal obligations quietly, but the court of public opinion was far less forgiving. The damage to his carefully crafted image was immense. The media ridiculed him relentlessly, painting him as a creep and a hypocrite. The incident threatened to erase years of creative work and permanently define his legacy. Amid the firestorm, a surprising wave of support emerged. Fans organized rallies, holding signs that read, "Save Pee-wee" and "We love you, Pee-wee." They saw the disconnect between the man's private mistake and the joy his creation brought into the world. Other celebrities also came to his defense. Cyndi Lauper publicly stood by him, and even Bill Cosby, a figure whose own legacy would later be re-evaluated for entirely different reasons, offered his support. These gestures were a small but significant counter-narrative to the overwhelming ridicule. They showed that while the media was quick to condemn, many people were willing to look past the headline and remember the artist they admired. But even with this support, the scandal cast a long, dark shadow that would follow Reubens for years. Just as the dust from the 1991 incident was beginning to settle, another controversy erupted. In 2001, authorities investigating a tip from overseas discovered a collection of what they deemed obscene material at Reubens' home. He was charged with a misdemeanor, and once again, his name was dragged through the mud. Reubens and his legal team maintained his innocence, arguing that the items in question were part of a large, historical collection of vintage erotica and art photography, not illegal material. He spoke publicly about the situation, expressing confusion and frustration, stating, "I have never, ever done anything with illegal material. "I'm a collector, and I've been a collector my whole life." The charges were eventually dropped after he pleaded guilty to a lesser city ordinance violation, but the hit to his reputation was another significant blow. Despite these immense setbacks, Paul Reubens refused to disappear. He understood that the Pee-wee persona was, for the time being, too radioactive, so he made a strategic pivot. He began taking on a wide variety of acting roles that were a far cry from the gray suit and red bow tie. He appeared in films like Blow, alongside Johnny Depp, and Mystery Men as the quirky, gas-passing superhero, the Spleen. He took on recurring roles in TV shows like Murphy Brown and lent his distinctive voice to animated projects like The Nightmare Before Christmas. It was a slow, deliberate process of reintroducing himself to the public, not as Pee-wee, but as Paul Reubens, a versatile and talented character actor. This period wasn't just about finding work. It was about rebuilding a career from the ground up and proving that his talent extended far beyond his most famous creation. The legacy of Paul Reubens is a fascinating tightrope walk between joy and controversy. On one side, you have Pee-wee Herman, an icon who redefined children's entertainment. The Playhouse wasn't just silly, it was groundbreaking. It championed creativity, non-conformity, and a kind of surrealist humor that influenced countless artists, writers, and comedians who came after. It showed that programming for kids could be smart, weird, and visually inventive without talking down to its audience. For millions of fans, Pee-wee represents a cherished part of their childhood, a symbol of pure, uninhibited fun. But on the other side of that legacy is the unavoidable scandal. The controversy exposed the fragile nature of celebrity and the unforgiving glare of the public eye. It highlighted a harsh reality. When you become a beloved public figure, especially one associated with childhood innocence, your private life is no longer entirely your own. Reubens' story became a cautionary tale about the immense pressure of fame and how quickly a private mistake can become a public spectacle, threatening to undo a lifetime of work. It forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about where we draw the line between a performer's art and their personal life. Ultimately, the story of Paul Reubens is a powerful lesson in resilience and reinvention. It prompts us to think about forgiveness and the capacity for growth. It challenges us to look beyond the sensational headlines and see the complex human being behind the public persona. Should one mistake define an entire career? How do we balance accountability with compassion? Reubens' journey from public pariah back to respected artist is a testament to his perseverance and the enduring power of his creative spirit. He never ran from his past, but he also refused to be solely defined by it, slowly and carefully carving out a new path for himself. Today, Pee-wee Herman lives on. Through nostalgic reruns, film revivals, and the loving memories of fans, the character has found a new life. Celebrated for the unique joy it brought to the world, Pee-wee has become a symbol of how true creativity can endure, even through the toughest of times. And Paul Reubens, both the man and the artist, leaves us with a profound reminder. He shows us that life is complicated, people are flawed, and that even when innocence seems shattered, its pieces can be put back together to shine in a new, perhaps more interesting, and ultimately more human way. Thank you so much for watching. What are your favorite memories of Pee-wee's Playhouse? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the stories that shaped our culture. We'll see you in the next one.